The repair manual. In the first post, I argued that logic is only as good as its inputs, and that the information supply chain feeding our reasoning is broken. In the second, I argued something harder, that even if the supply chain were perfect, your own cognitive biases would distort the information before logic ever touched it. If you followed both arguments, you are now in an uncomfortable position. The information is bad, the filter is compromised, and being smart doesn't help. In many cases, it makes things worse. The natural response is, so what do I do? And the natural answers people reach for: think critically, check your sources, be aware of your biases, are not wrong. They are just radically insufficient. They are the equivalent of telling someone standing in a burning building to be more careful with matches. The advice is technically correct and practically useless because it addresses the individual while ignoring the structure. The research on misinformation, cognitive bias, and epistemic failure points to something most people don't want to hear. The solution is not individual. It is structural. No person, no matter how intelligent or disciplined, can reliably outthink their own biases while swimming in a contaminated information environment. The problem is architectural, and the fix must be architectural. But structural does not mean someone else's problem. It means the fix operates on 3 layers simultaneously, and you have a role in all 3. The 3 layers. Layer 1, fix what people are reasoning from. The information supply chain, journalism, platforms, algorithms, incentives, determines what reaches your doorstep before you ever begin to think. If the supply is contaminated, no amount of individual critical thinking will save you. You cannot reason your way to truth from premises that were manufactured to deceive. This layer is about the supply side, rebuilding the institutions and incentive structures that produce reliable information. Public broadcasting, local journalism, platform accountability, algorithmic transparency, friction before sharing, the boring, unglamorous infrastructure of a functioning information ecosystem. The evidence here is clear. Countries with well-funded public broadcasters have dramatically higher news trust. Finland at 69%, the United States at 26%, according to the Reuters Institute's 2022 Digital News Report. When local newspapers die, municipal borrowing costs rise measurably, not because investors read the paper, but because the oversight function disappears and governance deteriorates. Simply prompting people to consider accuracy before sharing a headline reduces misinformation sharing by approximately 50%. These are not theoretical proposals. They are measured effects. The supply side is fixable. Post 4, fixing the feed, examines the evidence in detail. Layer 2, fix how people process what reaches them. Even clean information gets distorted by the cognitive filters described in the second post: confirmation bias, motivated reasoning, identity protective cognition. The supply can be perfect and the output will still be wrong if the filter is compromised. This layer is about the demand side, techniques and practices that genuinely reduce bias in human reasoning. Not awareness of bias, that is necessary but insufficient. Not intelligence, that often makes it worse. Specific, evidence-backed interventions that consider the opposite technique: pre-decisional accountability, inoculation against manipulation, intellectual humility as a deliberate practice. Philip Tetlock's superforecasters, ordinary people who consistently outperformed intelligence analysts with access to classified information, did not succeed because they were smarter. They succeeded because they practiced specific cognitive habits, holding beliefs as hypotheses, updating aggressively when evidence changed, seeking multiple perspectives, and treating being wrong as information rather than failure. A 40-minute debiasing training produced measurable improvement. A single training session using a serious game reduced bias by 19 to 32%, with effects persisting at least 2 months and transferring across domains. The demand side is improvable. Post 5. Debiasing the reasoner examines what works and what doesn't. Layer 3 builds systems that make truth-seeking the default. Here is the deepest insight from the research, the one that reframes everything. Epistemic quality is not an individual achievement. It is a social and institutional one. Science does not work because scientists are unbiased. Scientists are as biased as anyone else. Science works because the structure of science, peer review, replication, pre-registration, open data, the norm that no one gets the final say, channels individual bias into collective self-correction. The system catches what individuals cannot. Jonathan Rao calls this the constitution of knowledge, the institutional infrastructure that makes truth-seeking possible at scale. It operates on 2 rules: no one gets the final say, and no one has personal authority. The system does not require unbiased participants. It requires a structure that makes bias productive rather than destructive. This principle extends beyond science. Ireland's Citizens' Assembly, 99 randomly selected citizens who deliberated on one of the most divisive issues in Irish society, produced recommendations that 66.4% of the country endorsed in a referendum. The participants didn't arrive unbiased. They arrived with the same biases as everyone else. But the structure, diverse testimony, facilitated small group deliberation, expert input from all sides, produced something no individual could, a well-informed, nuanced consensus on a topic that had paralyzed Irish politics for decades. Hugo Mercier and Dan Sperber argue that human reasoning didn't evolve for individual truth-seeking at all. It evolved for argumentation in social contexts. It works best not in isolation, but in diverse groups with norms of accountability. Helen Longino makes the complementary case that objectivity itself is a social achievement, requiring structured disagreement among people with different background assumptions. The infrastructure layer is the most important and the least intuitive. Post 6, the architecture of truth makes the full case. Why you need all three. Supply without demand, you put quality information in front of people and they ignore it, or filter it through bias until it confirms what they already believe. We already have this problem. Quality journalism exists. People share the headline without reading the article. Demand without supply, you train skilled, humble, debiased thinkers and give them nothing reliable to think about. A super forecaster in a news desert is still flying blind. Both without infrastructure, you have good information and good thinkers, but no institutional structure to aggregate their judgments, resolve disagreements, or prevent the loudest voice from drowning out the most accurate one. This is the internet without moderation, a room full of capable people shouting past each other. The fix is layered. It is not one intervention. It is not one policy. It is not one habit. It is a system. A set of interlocking structural, cognitive, and institutional practices that together make truth-seeking more likely than truth-avoiding. No single layer is sufficient. The research is consistent on this point. Media literacy produces real but modest effects. Debiasing techniques produce real but modest effects. Platform nudges produce real but modest effects. But modest effects compound, and structural reforms, journalism funding, platform regulation, deliberative institutions, may be more consequential than any individual intervention, though they are harder to study experimentally and more politically contested. The historical anchor. If this feels overwhelming, if it feels like a crisis too large and too structural for any individual to address, it is worth knowing that we have been here before. The printing press broke Europe's information order in the 15th century. The Catholic Church had held a near monopoly on the production and distribution of knowledge. Gutenberg's invention shattered that monopoly, and what followed was not an immediate flowering of truth. What followed was over a century of chaos, propaganda, religious wars, conspiracy, and the weaponization of the new medium by every faction that could access it. The epistemic sales rather than truth. The crisis was not resolved by readers becoming more discerning. It was resolved by the professionalization of journalism, the founding of journalism schools, the development of professional codes of ethics, the creation of wire services like the Associated Press that had structural incentives for accuracy over partisanship. The pattern is consistent. Information technology disruptions create epistemic crises lasting 1 to 3 generations, resolved not primarily by individuals thinking better, but by the construction of new institutions adapted to the new medium. We are in the early decades of the internet disruption. The old institutions, 20th century journalism, broadcast regulation, editorial gatekeeping, have been shattered. The new ones have not yet been built. That is the work of this generation. What comes next? The remaining posts in this series take each layer apart and examine it in detail. Fixing the feed, the evidence on what works to repair the information supply chain, public broadcasting, platform design, pre-bunking, and the structural reforms that make quality information available. Debiasing the reasoner, the evidence on what works to fix the cognitive filter, super forecaster habits, intellectual humility, inoculation theory, and the honest limits of individual debiasing. The architecture of truth, the evidence that truth-seeking is structural deliberative democracy, adversarial collaboration, scientific epistemology, and the institutional designs that channel bias into productive competition. The virus and the vaccine, the synthesis, scale all of this to civilization. Polarization is the global disease. Education, deployed structurally the way Finland did it, the way cybersecurity did it, is the vaccine. The audit, the turn back to you, given everything the research shows. What will you actually do? The thesis is simple. The execution is not. But the research is clear on one point. The problem is solvable, not perfectly, not quickly, not by any one person, but solvable the way every previous information crisis has been solved, by building. The first post asked, is the information true? The second asked, would you even know if it wasn't? This post asks the structural question, what would it take to make knowing possible, not just for you, but for everyone?